Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix, and welcome to another episode in my series, Phoenix Discovers the Universe. What is new on the shelf with Phoenix? Well, 2 books. First, Permutation City, a novel by the author Greg Egan, as well as Reality Plus, a philosophy book written by David Chalmers. Now, I am super stoked to make this video today and talk about these books, specifically because I want to talk about simulation theory and its connected theory, the dust theory. Now, there's a lot to say. Just to note, there will be spoilers ahead for both the philosophy book and the novel. But it seems to me that we've entered this technological information age, where one of the biggest things that we think about now is whether or not we live in a simulation. And there are arguments that show that it is likely that we do live in a simulation, based off the mathematics. But then, of course, there's evidence that we don't, and I want to be realistic in my undertaking with this theme, while also exploring the ideas. Now, one thing that I would say is that with reading David Chalmers, he talks about a theory called the dust theory, which is modeled off Greg Egan's understanding and his own perspective of the theory. I think it might have even been invented by Greg Egan, for that matter. I think it debuts in this book, Permutation City. But details aside, it seems to me as though David Chalmers is very interested in the world as being partly simulated. And this is something that is very popular right now with scientific circles, because we're really asking what is real. And the dust theory, to make a long story short, postulates that something as disconnected as a dust cloud is enough to basically simulate a reality. Now, the dust theory is one way of looking at this whole larger picture of the world as simulation. And it definitely makes you think about how what is possible might seem impossible, but could be possible, because maybe causality is not exactly what we think it is. Maybe, according to Permutation City, you could argue that life as we know it, or any kind of real world, can evolve within a simulation. And I think that's one of the most powerful ideas that I take away from Permutation City, which is to think that life and the world can come out of the most disconnected states, such as a dust cloud, to the point to where life could really exist anywhere, in any possible thing. Now, of course, we know the materialist point of view, which is basically that everything is material, there is only matter, and so to argue that something is more of a representation of something doesn't seem as convincing. But it seems to me that this is still interesting to consider. And so in reading David Chalmers and Greg Egan, I've definitely been thinking about how much the dust theory fascinates me. Even just the phrase of dust theory is interesting to me because it's very evocative and kind of is a very interesting image. But to me it seems as though, why should we keep it simple with thinking about the world? Why not go ahead and try to imagine what could be? And what's interesting is, if all of these worlds that are simulated evolve because of their own internal mathematical structure, it is an interesting idea at the very least, but makes me think about how this idea is tied into a lot of what science fiction is exploring and what philosophy is exploring, which is, like I said, what is real and how do we know what real is? And when I think of these ideas, I can't help but puzzle over them, because I acknowledge for myself I don't quite know what real is, and maybe my reality is actually very tenuous and might be evolving with everyone else around me in this universe that is actually simulated. Now, of course, we could take the materialist perspective and say that the dust theory is more speculative and might not have any evidence for it. We could even argue that simulation theory itself is actually very untenable, and that a lot of it is not what we would expect it to be true. But it seems to me as though, for my own life, I really get fascinated by these ideas because I think, what if there is so much more to explore in our reality to really get to the root of it? And so, in thinking of Permutation City, I definitely think the plot is interesting because the story is basically following the arc of the Lambertians, who are an organism, basically alien species that exists in the simulation. And they evolve on their own. And one of the most interesting things is that once they have a conversation with the main characters about what is real, they become spooked because they think, well, we are real, and we want to acknowledge that. And so they go away on their own and form their own new world that is cut off from the world of the main characters, which, by the way, includes Paul, who is the one that is making the copies of himself in the computer, in the simulation, as well as Maria, who is the one that is helping him. Now, I'll be honest, I think that all of this is very complicated to talk about, and it's a complicated plot, but I think what I really want to own in on, or zero in on, is this notion that things might be more tenuous than we realize. Because how do we know what real is? How do we know that we aren't just a disconnected simulation in being created by a dust cloud? And the more that I think about it, the more I think that maybe that is the most powerful element of life, is A, on the one hand, we don't know what is real, and that anything could arise from out of it in a kind of emergentist philosophy is another analogy I would use. But maybe the other side of it, B, is that life evolves, that somehow or another things come out of the simple rules that are prescribed to them. And I think that that's a very interesting idea, because even though I might acknowledge that the world appears finite, what if there's more to it? What if this evolution that we are undertaking is actually very ethereal and abstract and infinite? And that's why I love these ideas. I'm not saying I'd want to live in a simulation or make a copy of myself in the simulation just to live forever. And actually, that's one of the things that I wonder about with Greg Egan, is the transhumanism, which focuses a lot on basically overcoming the human element of life, overcoming our own biology and the laws of physics. But on the other hand, I look at it from the perspective of postulating these ideas. What is possible? What are we experiencing as we get through life? And yes, I can acknowledge the simple pattern of life, which seems to be that biology eventually fades because individuals do pass away and organisms do. But also looking at it in terms of maybe the point is to consider that all of the ways in which we exist are open-ended, because it's not really clear how life would evolve in either a simulation or in the materialist world that we know of. And so it really is fascinating, because I don't think there's really an easy answer to trying to figure out these things. And it fascinates me because I want to explore through the realm of ideas, whether philosophy or fiction or other mediums, to think about these things. And I really like the idea of pursuing the exploration of such things, because I think that it is very fascinating. Now, I do think that life is complex, not just life as an individual, though of course I speak for myself, but also life as life, biological life, and physical life. And it makes me think about how so many things are possible, and how also it is easy to feel constrained by our material world. But when I think about the simulation theory, I think, what is possible infinitely? Why is it that we always want to constrain our definitions of things to be incredibly limited? Why not let them be more open-ended? And that's what I like about this, to think about our explanations as being open-ended And that's why I like the challenge of the simulation theory, because even though I might personally think it's untenable, because there really isn't evidence for it, it's interesting to think about because it shows us that there's different layers and representations to what we might easily take for granted in our daily lives. I think it's so easy to get caught up in all of the things that we feel like we're supposed to that are often so superficial and that prevent us from using our imagination. But the reason why I love the dust theory is because it's an interesting way of challenging my common sense understanding of the world. What if there is a way in which so many things connect in so many new ways, and I'm learning about that through my reading and through my exploration of these ideas, but I think that there's so much more to it. And I have personally been fascinated by these ideas of representations and thinking about the simulation hypothesis specifically and how things might be represented in space or in a simulation or in math. And I love that idea because, as I said, it's helping me explore new things, it's helping me challenge my common sense perspective, and it's helping me figure out what I really think about and what I would like to focus on. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this in my Phoenix Discovers the Universe series is because I think it is, even though it is a science fiction idea and is not necessarily based in hard science as we might imagine it, like material science, even if it does have some hard science elements because Greg Egan is very scientific in his views, I think that it very much is something that is interesting to think about, and I think that the exploration is always asking the questions. It's not just about what we think is easy to understand or just what we think has evidence. It's also really delving into the abstract and philosophical realm that I think science fiction can do, and that's why I've been such a fan of science fiction for quite a while now, with thinking about Greg Egan's approach specifically in the way that he writes short stories and novels, and how I think that it's very exciting. And so I don't want to give away too much of the book, but I encourage you to read it. I think that you would get a lot out of it, even though it can be very dense and can be difficult to understand. I think that it's very interesting. And like I would say, to close this video, a lot of what I'm really thinking about is challenging common sense views. Maybe sometimes we have to challenge conventional ideas in science and what other people postulate. Maybe we need to be able to challenge it. And that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately. So yeah, I'm Phoenix. I hope you enjoyed this discussion in my Phoenix Discovers the Universe series. Thank you for checking it out with me. And yeah, I'm Phoenix, and I will see you soon.